What broke something in me on the night of his 30th birthday wasn't jealousy. It was the way he made me disposable. Like I could be removed from the table, from the evening, from the relationship itself, with a single sentence. My name is Audrey Bennett. I'm 32 years old. I work as a senior operations analyst for a healthcare system in Chicago. My job is numbers, contracts, patterns, things that can be solved with logic and a steady mind. I've always believed that was my strength, that I didn't overreact, that I didn't make scenes, that I understood how to stay calm when things got complicated. That night, I was standing outside Monave Verde on West Randolph. October wind cut through my coat, carrying the smell of garlic, traffic, and cold pavement. Inside, everything looked warm. Golden light, clinking glasses, laughter layered over itself like nothing in the world was out of place. Nolan stood next to me, scrolling through the reservation confirmation on his phone. I only asked one thing. Could Cassie sit somewhere else tonight? Not because I wanted to control his birthday. Not because I wanted to start something. But because at the last company event, Cassie had sat pressed against his side for 2 hours, while I stood near the coat rack, holding both our jackets like I had wandered into someone else's life by mistake. Nolan turned to look at me, and just like that, his expression went cold. "Audrey," he said, flat and precise, "if you can't handle Cassie sitting next to me at my own birthday dinner, then you can leave." He didn't raise his voice, but he didn't lower it either. It carried just enough for the couple by the door to glance over. Just enough for a laugh inside the restaurant to falter and disappear. Just enough for me to understand something with perfect clarity. I wasn't being invited in. I was being tolerated, and only if I stayed quiet. I looked at him, at his new coat, at the way he stood there, completely certain, completely unbothered, like I was the one making things uncomfortable. Not him, not the woman who always stood a little too close, not the way he had turned one small question into a character flaw. I said softly, "Okay." Then I turned and walked away. I heard him call my name once, sharp, controlled, like he expected me to stop, to turn back, to correct myself. I didn't. Maybe he thought I would, that I'd get halfway down the block, realize I had overreacted, and come back to apologize. I had done that before, a year ago, maybe 2, but not that night. I drove 15 minutes back to my apartment in Lincoln Park, unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stopped. The silence hit first. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft rattle of the heating system behind the walls, the kind of quiet that makes a space feel larger than it is. I stood there, keys still in my hand, and a thought came, simple but sharp enough to hurt. Why was I the one leaving, from my own home? Looking back, I know that night wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time I stopped lying to myself. Cassie had entered this picture about a year after Nolan started his new job. At first, it was just work messages. Then late-night texts. Then the lake house weekend, where he told me not to make things weird, just because she was there. "She's just my work wife," he'd said once, smiling like it was harmless, like it was modern, like it didn't mean anything. I remember knowing, instantly, menacingly, that it wasn't right. But I let it go. At the company holiday party, I stood by the coat check. Cassie stood close to him, too close to be accidental. When she gave her speech, she called him the smartest person in the room, said he understood ideas before she finished explaining them. People clapped. He smiled. On the drive home, I kept my voice careful. That felt a little personal. Nolan looked at me like I had said something embarrassing. She was just being nice. "I know, You're making things weird again." That phrase became familiar. "You're too sensitive. You're overthinking. You can't handle me having a female friend." On Valentine's Day, he said he had to stay late for work. I ordered his favorite Thai food. Waited until almost midnight. Didn't eat. He came home after 12, said the team had been working nonstop. The next morning, I saw a photo someone had tagged. Nolan, Cassie, 2 other coworkers, a bar in River North, 9:30 p.m. When I asked, he didn't apologize. "So now I have to give you a minute-by-minute update of my night?" I didn't argue. Not because I was okay, but because I had started to doubt my own instincts. Like I was being shown a version of reality that didn't quite line up, and somehow I was the one expected to adjust. That night, back in my apartment, my phone buzzed. "Nolan, are you seriously doing this?" Not "I'm sorry." Not "let's talk." Just irritation. Because I had actually left. I didn't reply. 2 hours later. "Nolan, you're being childish." I turned my phone face down. Sat there. Listened to the city in the distance. Listened to the pipes in the walls. Listened to my own thoughts, finally clear. The apartment was in my name. The lease. The utilities. The deposit. All of it. Nolan had moved in 18 months ago. There was no real agreement. No clear structure. Just me, believing I was building a life with someone. And that night, for the first time, I let myself consider something I had been avoiding. Maybe I wasn't the one he chose. Maybe I was just the one he stayed with, until something better came along. I barely slept. And when morning finally came, gray light slipping through the windows, a thought settled in. Quiet, cold, undeniable. If he could let me walk out of his life that easily, then maybe it was time I stopped asking for permission to stay in it. I didn't cry the next morning. That surprised me. I'd always thought something like this would break me open in a loud, messy way, that I'd call someone, that I'd replay every conversation, that I'd need someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. Instead, I woke up with a kind of silence inside me I didn't recognize. Not peace. Not yet, but something close to clarity. The first thing I did was make coffee. The second was look around my apartment like I was seeing it for the first time. His shoes were still by the door. His jacket was draped over the chair. His charger was plugged into the wall next to the couch, like he had every intention of coming back and picking up right where he left off. Like last night had been nothing. My phone buzzed again. Nolan, are we seriously not going to talk about this? I stared at the message. Then I set my phone down. And I stood up. The decision didn't feel dramatic. It felt overdue. I went to the closet and pulled out one of the empty storage bins we kept stacked on the top shelf. Then another. Then another. I started with the easy things. T-shirts, gym clothes, socks. Things that didn't carry memory. Things that didn't make me stop and think. By the time I got to his dress shirts, I slowed down. Not because I missed him, but because I was starting to understand something I hadn't wanted to see before. There was a pattern, not just in how he treated me, but in how he was preparing to leave. I noticed it when I opened the second drawer of his desk. There was a folder, clean, organized, deliberate. Inside were printed listings. Apartments, high-rise buildings downtown, floor plans, pricing breakdowns, lease estimates, move-in timelines. I sat down slowly, my coffee forgotten on the counter. The dates on the printouts weren't new. Some were from 3 weeks ago, some from a month, one from nearly 2 months back. He hadn't been confused. He hadn't been figuring things out. He had been planning, quietly, systematically, while sleeping in my bed, while eating food I paid for, while telling me I was overthinking. I flipped through the pages. One listing had notes written in the margins. Good light, close to office, parking included. My chest tightened, but it wasn't the kind of pain I expected. It wasn't panic. It wasn't heartbreak. It was something colder. Recognition. I kept digging. Under the listings was a printed email chain. Subject line, tour confirmation. He had scheduled viewings. Multiple. Weeknights. Weekends. Times he had told me he was working late, or out with the team, or too exhausted to go out. I let out a slow breath, and for the first time, everything lined up. The distance, the defensiveness, the way every concern I raised somehow turned into my fault. He wasn't confused. He was transitioning, and I had been the overlap. My phone buzzed again. Nolan, Audrey, seriously, pick up your phone. I didn't. Instead, I stood up and walked to the front door. I looked at the lock. Then I looked back at the apartment, at the boxes I had already started filling, at the folder still open on the desk, at the life I thought I was building, and something inside me clicked into place. I grabbed my keys, walked out, and drove straight to the hardware store. The locksmith didn't ask many questions. He just checked my ID, matched it to the lease, and nodded. Your place, he said simply. Yes, I replied. And that was it. No drama, no explanation. Just a quiet confirmation of something I had always known, but never acted on. When I got back, I didn't hesitate. I replaced the lock, tested the key, locked it, unlocked it, locked it again. The sound was small, but final. Inside, I went back to packing. This time faster, more precise. I didn't sort things by emotion anymore. I sorted them by ownership. What was mine stayed. What was his went into boxes. No exceptions, no negotiations. Around noon, I found something else. A small velvet box tucked into the back corner of the closet shelf. Not mine. I opened it. Inside was a watch. Sleek, expensive, carefully chosen. I turned it over in my hand. There was an engraving on the back. For your next chapter. C. I stared at it. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I let out a quiet, humorless breath. Cassie. Of course. It wasn't just emotional overlap. It wasn't just blurred boundaries. There was intention here. Investment. A future being built. And I had been standing right in the middle of it, convincing myself I was imagining things. My phone lit up again. This time a call. Nolan. I watched it ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then it stopped. A second later, a message came through. Nolan, why aren't you answering me? I picked up the phone. Typed. Paused. Deleted. Then typed again. Me. Your things will be packed by tonight. I hit send before I could overthink it. The reply came almost instantly. Nolan, what does that mean? I didn't answer, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one confused. I set the phone down, looked around my apartment, my space, my lease, my life, and continued packing. This time, not like someone trying to hold things together, but like someone who finally understood they were done. By the time the sun started dropping behind the buildings across the street, every trace of Nolan that didn't belong to me was inside a box. Not scattered, not emotional. Organized. Labeled. Final. I lined them up by the door. 3 large storage bins, 2 smaller boxes, and a garment bag with his suit zipped neatly inside. It looked less like a breakup and more like a move-out that had been scheduled weeks in advance. Which, in a way, it had been. Just not by me. My phone stayed quiet for almost an hour after my last message. Then it lit up again. Nolan, Audrey, what are you doing? I didn't answer. Another message. Nolan, you're overreacting. We need to talk before you do something stupid. I stared at the screen. There it was again. Not concern. Not confusion. Control. The assumption that I would pause everything, my thoughts, my decisions, my boundaries, until he was ready to step in and reframe the situation. I locked my phone and set it aside. A few minutes later, it rang. This time I answered, not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted to hear how he would explain it. Finally, Nolan said, the moment I picked up. No hello, no hesitation. What is going on? I leaned back against the kitchen counter, my voice steady. I found the listings. Silence, just for a second. But it was enough. What listings? He said too quickly. The apartments, the tours, the timelines. Another pause. Longer this time. Audrey, that's not what? I cut in. Not what it looks like, because it looks like you've been planning to move out for at least 2 months. You're twisting this, he snapped. I was just looking. People look. People don't schedule tours, I said calmly. They don't write notes in the margins. They don't map out move-in dates. He exhaled sharply. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was. Again. Minimize. Redirect. Make me the problem. I also found the watch, I added. That landed. I could feel it through the silence on the other end. What watch? He asked, but his voice had already changed. The one with the engraving, I said. For your next chapter. C. This time the silence stretched. Thick. Heavy. Honest. It's not what you think, he said finally. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. Then explain it. It's just a gift, he said, from the team. Does the whole team sign with a C now? He didn't answer. And that was the moment it settled completely. Not the suspicion. Not the fear. The truth. You should come get your things, I said, my voice quiet but firm. They'll be by the door. Audrey, don't do this, he said quickly. You're acting impulsively. We can talk this through like adults. I am, I replied. This is me talking it through. You're locking me out of my own place over a misunderstanding? I opened my eyes, looked around the apartment, at the walls I had painted, the furniture I had chosen, the space I had built. No, I said, I'm locking you out of mine. He went quiet. And for the first time since the conversation started, he didn't have a response ready. I'll come by tonight, he said after a moment, his tone shifting, less sharp, more controlled. We'll figure this out. No, I said. Another pause. What do you mean, no? I mean you can come tomorrow, I said, at noon. Audrey! My sister will be here, I added. That stopped him. You're bringing your sister into this? I'm making sure this stays simple. A beat. Then softer, different. Audrey, you're blowing this up over nothing. I didn't respond right away. Because I realized something in that moment that felt almost unsettling in its clarity. To him, this really was nothing. Not the late nights. Not the lies. Not the plans to leave. Not even Cassie. Because in his version of reality, none of it mattered until I reacted. And my reaction. That was the problem. I'll see you tomorrow, I said. Then I hung up. The next morning I woke up before my alarm. Not because I was anxious, but because I was done waiting. I moved through the apartment quietly, almost methodically. Coffee, shower, clean clothes. I opened the windows slightly, letting cold air move through the space, clearing out the stale weight of the last few days. By 11:30, everything was ready. Boxes by the door, keys off the hook. Nothing left to say. My sister arrived 10 minutes early. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just looked around once, took in the boxes, then looked at me. You okay? She asked. I nodded. Yeah. She studied me for a second longer, then gave a small approving nod. Good. At exactly 12, there was a knock at the door. Not hesitant, not soft, controlled, measured. Like he still believed this was a situation he could manage. I walked over, unlocked the door, opened it. Nolan stood there, hands in his coat pockets, expression tight but composed. His eyes flicked past me, taking in the apartment, the boxes, my sister standing behind me. Everything. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "This," I said, stepping aside just enough for him to see clearly, "is your exit." He didn't move right away, just stood there, looking, processing, calculating. And for the first time since I had known him, he looked like he had lost control of the narrative. "Can we talk?" he asked. "We are," I said. His gaze shifted to my sister, then back to me. "You really think this is necessary?" I held his eyes. "Yes." A long silence followed. Heavy. Unavoidable. Then he stepped inside. Slowly. Like he was entering a place that no longer belonged to him. And maybe, for the first time, he understood that it didn't. Nolan didn't touch the boxes right away. He walked past them. Like if he ignored what was right in front of him, the situation might rearrange itself into something more familiar, more manageable. My sister didn't move. She leaned casually against the wall near the kitchen, arms crossed. Not aggressive, just present. A quiet reminder that this wasn't going to be rewritten mid-scene. Nolan stopped in the middle of the living room. "This is unnecessary," he said, looking at me, voice controlled. "We could have talked about this like normal people." I almost smiled, because for months I had tried to be normal, careful, understanding, patient, and every time I brought something up, it had been turned back on me. "You mean like when I asked about Cassie?" I said. His jaw tightened. "This isn't about her." "It is," I replied. "It's about everything you said she wasn't." He exhaled, slow and irritated, like he was preparing to deal with something tedious. "You're creating a story that isn't real," he said. "Cassie is a coworker. That's it." I stepped aside and picked up the velvet box from the counter, opened it, turned it so he could see. Coworkers don't usually engrave watches like this. His eyes flicked down, then away. "It was a team gift," he said. "Then your team should learn how to sign their names." Silence, sharp this time. My sister let out a quiet breath behind me, almost like a suppressed laugh, but didn't say anything. Nolan ran a hand through his hair, shifting his weight. "You're fixating on the wrong things," he said. "Even if I looked at apartments, that doesn't mean I was leaving you." I held his gaze. "You scheduled tours." "That doesn't mean anything." "It means you were planning." "No," he said quickly. "It means I was considering options." Options. The word landed heavier than anything else he had said. Not us. Not our relationship. Options. Was I one of them? I asked. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. "Audrey." "No," I said, shaking my head slightly. "Just answer that." His eyes hardened. "This isn't fair." There it was again. Not denial. Not truth. Deflection. "I think it's exactly fair," I said quietly. He looked around the apartment again, at the walls, the furniture, the life he had been living inside, while preparing one outside of it. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "People look at apartments all the time. It doesn't mean they're leaving their relationship." "People don't hide it," I replied. That landed. He didn't argue immediately, because there wasn't a clean way to. Instead, he shifted tactics. His tone softened. Lower, more familiar. "Audrey, you know I've been under a lot of pressure lately," he said. "Work's been intense. I haven't been thinking clearly." I watched him carefully. This version of Nolan was different. Less sharp. More reasonable. It would have worked before. Months ago. Maybe even weeks ago. "You were thinking clearly enough to plan viewings," I said. "That's not what I meant." "I know." A pause. Then he tried again. "You're taking one piece of this and turning it into something it's not." I didn't respond, because I realized something in that moment. He wasn't trying to explain. He was trying to reshape, to guide the conversation back into something he could manage. Something where I would start questioning myself again. But that version of me, the one that needed reassurance, that needed him to define what was real, wasn't standing here anymore. "You should take your things," I said, nodding toward the boxes. He didn't move. Instead, he looked at me like he was seeing me differently, like he was recalculating. "You're serious," he said. "Yes." Another silence. Then, quieter. "Over this?" I let out a slow breath. "It's not over this," I said. "It's over everything that led to this." He held my gaze, searching, waiting, for hesitation, for doubt, for anything he could use. There wasn't any. Behind me, my sister shifted slightly, still silent, still watching. Nolan looked down at the boxes, then back at me, and something in his expression changed. Not regret. Not exactly. Something closer to realization. "You're really done," he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because for the first time since he walked in, he understood. This wasn't a fight he could win. Not because I was louder, or angrier, or more emotional, but because I had stopped needing him to agree. He walked over to the boxes, picked one up, set it down again. Like even that simple action felt unfamiliar now. You didn't have to do it like this, he muttered. I tilted my head slightly. How would you have preferred I did it? He didn't answer. Because we both knew. There wasn't a version of this where he walked away comfortably, where he kept control, where I stayed soft enough to make it easy. He grabbed the first box, then another, carried them to the door. My sister stepped aside just enough to let him pass. Still silent, still present, still making sure nothing blurred. When he came back for the last of his things, he stopped in front of me, close enough that once I would have reached out. Now I didn't move. This didn't have to end like this, he said. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the man I had tried so hard to understand, to support, to not make things weird for. And for the first time, I didn't feel confused. I think it already did, I said. He held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded once, tight, controlled, and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Not dramatic, not loud, but final. I stood there for a moment, listening, to the quiet, to the absence, to the space he left behind. My sister finally spoke. Wow, she said softly. He really thought he could talk his way out of that. I let out a small breath. Not quite a laugh. Yeah, I said. Then I looked around my apartment, at the light coming through the windows, at the space that finally felt like mine again. And for the first time in a long time, nothing felt uncertain. The apartment felt different after he left. Not emptier, clearer, like something had been removed that I hadn't realized was taking up space. My sister stayed for a while. We didn't dissect it, didn't replay every word. She made tea. I sat at the kitchen counter. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You didn't flinch once." I shrugged. I already did that part. She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. Before she left, she squeezed my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she said. It landed deeper than I expected. Not because I needed approval, but because for the first time, I believed it too. The first message came that night. Not from Nolan, from his mother, Mrs. Carter. "Audrey, sweetheart, Nolan told me you had a misunderstanding. Can you please call me?" I stared at it for a long second. Then I set my phone down. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. "Mrs. Carter, I think you're overreacting. Relationships go through phases. Don't throw everything away over something small." Something small? I almost smiled. The next message came before I could decide whether to respond. "Mrs. Carter, Nolan is devastated. He said you won't even talk to him." I picked up my phone. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. "Me. This isn't a misunderstanding, and it's not small." I didn't send anything else, because I knew how this would go. It would be reframed, softened, turned into something fixable, if I was just willing to bend a little more. I wasn't. Pat. The next morning, I went back to work, not because I felt normal, but because I needed structure. Numbers made sense. Spreadsheets didn't lie. They didn't shift depending on who was asking. Around noon, my inbox pinged. A name I didn't expect. Cassie. Subject line, "I think we should talk." I stared at it, then opened it. "Audrey, I know this is probably not what you want to hear right now, but I think there's been a lot of miscommunication. Nolan and I are just colleagues. I would never cross a boundary like that. I'm sorry if anything I did made you uncomfortable. That was never my intention." I read it twice, then a third time. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. Perfectly. Careful language. No accountability. Just enough apology to seem reasonable. Just enough distance to deny everything. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed the email and went back to my work. That evening, Nolan texted again. "Nolan, can we meet? Just once. I think we owe each other that." I stared at the message, then at the empty space across from me. The chair he used to sit in. The place where I used to wait. For explanations. For reassurance. For clarity. I didn't need any of that anymore. But I did need something else. Closure. Not the kind that comes from answers. The kind that comes from saying everything clearly, once. On my terms. "Me, tomorrow, 5 p.m., public place." He replied almost instantly. "Nolan, thank you." I didn't respond. I chose a cafe downtown. Neutral. Bright. No history attached to it. When I arrived, he was already there. Sitting at a corner table. Hands wrapped around a coffee he hadn't touched. He stood when he saw me, like we were still something that required politeness. "Hey," he said. "Hi." I sat across from him. No hesitation. No small talk. No pretending. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned forward slightly. "I'm glad you came." I nodded once. "Say what you need to say." He blinked, like that wasn't the script he expected. "I've been thinking a lot," he started. "About everything." I waited. "I didn't handle things perfectly," he admitted. "I should have been more transparent." More transparent. I almost smiled. That's one way to put it. He ignored that. Or chose to. "But you're taking this to an extreme," he continued. "Looking at apartments doesn't mean I was leaving you. It means I was thinking." About leaving, I said. He exhaled, frustrated. Nice. No, about options. There it was again. Options. I leaned back slightly. And where did I fit into those options? He hesitated. Then, I didn't know yet. That answer was more honest than anything else he had said. And somehow it made everything simpler. I nodded slowly. Okay. He looked at me, surprised. That's it? That's enough. A pause. Then he leaned in again, more urgent now. Audrey, we've built something real. You don't just throw that away because things got complicated. I held his gaze. We didn't build the same thing. He frowned. What does that mean? It means I was building a life, I said calmly, and you were building a backup plan. That landed. Hard. He sat back. Silent. For the first time since we sat down. He didn't have a response ready. You didn't trust me, he said finally. I shook my head. I did. That confused him more. Then what is this? This, I said, steady and clear, is me realizing I shouldn't have. The words sat between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. Final. He looked down at his untouched coffee. Then back at me. And that's it? He asked quietly. You're just done? I nodded. Yes. A long silence followed. Then, almost under his breath, you're going to regret this. I stood up. Not abruptly. Not emotionally. Just finished. I don't think so, I said. And then I walked away. That night, I blocked his number. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Because there was nothing left to say. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. The first morning without him felt quiet. Not the kind of quiet that presses in on you. The kind that opens up. I woke up before my alarm, sunlight slipping through the blinds in thin, pale lines across the wall. For a moment, I lay there, not moving, not thinking, just noticing the stillness. No tension, no anticipation, no low, constant hum of trying to keep something from falling apart. I got up slowly, made coffee, opened the windows. Cold air moved through the apartment, clean and sharp, carrying the distant sound of traffic and voices from the street below. Life continuing, unbothered. I stood there for a while, cup warm in my hands, and let it settle. This was mine, not shared, not negotiated, not something I had to hold together for someone else. Just mine. The first few days passed quietly. Work, home, sleep. Routine returned in small, steady pieces. But what surprised me wasn't how much I missed him. It was how much I didn't. There were moments, of course. A song, a restaurant we used to go to, a random thought that reached for him out of habit and found nothing. But it didn't break me. It just stopped, like a reflex that had nowhere to land anymore. A week later, I repainted the bedroom. It wasn't dramatic, just a soft, neutral color, lighter than before. Brighter. I moved the furniture, changed the layout, shifted the bed away from the wall we used to share. Not because I needed to erase him, but because I wanted the space to reflect something new, something that didn't carry his imprint. While I worked, music played quietly in the background. At one point, I caught my reflection in the window. Paint on my hands, hair pulled back, no makeup, no performance. And I realized something. I looked lighter, not happier exactly, but clearer. Like I wasn't carrying something invisible anymore. 2 weeks after the breakup, I ran into one of Nolan's coworkers. Not Cassie, someone else. We recognized each other immediately. There was that brief moment of hesitation where both people decide whether to acknowledge what they know. She chose first. I'm sorry about everything, she said. I tilted my head slightly. What everything? She hesitated. Then, carefully. Nolan talked about you a lot at the office. I didn't react. I just waited. He said things were already over, she continued. That you were just figuring out the logistics. A small, quiet pause. And that you'd probably help him move because you're like that. That landed, not sharply, not painfully, just clearly. Of course he had. It fit. The narrative. The version of events where he stayed reasonable, composed, where I was just a detail being managed. Thank you for telling me, I said. She nodded, relieved. I didn't think it was right, she added. I know, I said. And I meant it. Because for the first time, none of it made me question myself. A few days later, I passed Monte Verde again. Same street. Same warm light spilling through the windows. Same soft blur of people inside, laughing, leaning in toward each other, like everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. I slowed down, just for a second, then kept walking. No tightening in my chest. No replaying that night. No urge to rewrite it. Just a memory. One that had already lost its power. That evening, I sat in my apartment, with a glass of wine and my laptop open in front of me. Not working, just thinking about everything, about how easily I had almost stayed, how close I had been to explaining things away. to adjusting, to making myself smaller so the relationship could keep working, and how, in the end, it hadn't taken a dramatic betrayal to wake me up. Just one sentence. Then you can leave. I closed my laptop, looked around the room, at the space I had rebuilt, at the quiet I had chosen, at the version of my life that no longer required permission. And I understood something with a kind of calm certainty that didn't need to be spoken out loud. I had never actually been afraid of losing him. I had been afraid of being wrong about him, about us, about everything I thought we were building. But I wasn't wrong. I had just been the only one building. And now, I wasn't building alone anymore. I was building for myself. Months later, someone asked me what happened between us. I didn't give them the long version, didn't explain the timelines, the messages, the plans he made behind my back. I just said, he gave me an exit. They frowned slightly. What do you mean? I smiled. Not bitter, not sad, just certain. I said, he made it very clear I didn't belong in his life anymore. A small pause. Then I added, and for the first time, I believed him. I never heard from Nolan again. Not because he didn't try, but because I didn't leave any doors open for him to come back through. And that, more than anything, was the difference. Not that he changed. Not that the story had some dramatic ending. But that I did. Quietly. Completely. Irreversibly.